For nearly 400 years, no senior member of the British royal family had been arrested by police. Not during the abdication crisis of 1936. Not during the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage. Not during any of the scandals that have rocked the House of Windsor across a century of wars, divorces, and public humiliations. That streak ended on February 19, 2026, when a man in his 60s was taken into custody in Norfolk on suspicion of misconduct in public office. British police wouldn't name him, following standard procedure for unconvicted suspects. They didn't have to. The man was Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, younger brother of King Charles III, and formerly known to the world as Prince Andrew. This is not a manufactured scandal. It's not a rumor pulled from an anonymous tipster or an invented palace leak designed to farm clicks. It is one of the most significant, well-documented crises the British monarchy has faced in the modern era. And at its core, it's a story about authority. Who actually has the power to police a royal family that has, for centuries, existed partly outside the reach of ordinary law? What happens when that power runs into an active criminal investigation? And whether the Crown's authority to punish its own members quietly, through stripped titles and private evictions, is enough when the public wants something closer to actual justice. Let's walk through exactly what happened, in the order it happened, using only what's been confirmed by police statements, palace statements, and named reporting. The roots of this crisis go back more than a decade, to Andrew's long and increasingly toxic association with the American financier Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender who died in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019 while awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges. Andrew's friendship with Epstein predated the financier's first conviction and continued, by Andrew's own admission, even after Epstein registered as a sex offender. That relationship produced a catastrophic 2019 BBC Newsnight interview in which Andrew attempted to explain his conduct and instead deepened public outrage, ultimately forcing him to step back from public royal duties entirely. In 2022, Virginia Giuffre, who accused Andrew of sexually abusing her when she was 17 after being trafficked by Epstein, filed a civil lawsuit against him in the United States. Andrew denied every allegation, but settled the case out of court that same year, reportedly paying Giuffre in the region of $16 million. He lost his military affiliations and royal patronages around the same time, though he retained his title of Duke of York, and continued, controversially, to live rent-free at Royal Lodge, a 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate. For years afterward, Andrew existed in an uncomfortable royal limbo, publicly disgraced but never formally cast out, a walking reminder that the institution's authority over its own members had real limits. According to multiple royal correspondents, this became a genuine point of tension between King Charles and his son and heir, Prince William. Reporting from outlets including Radar Online described the disagreement as something closer to a power struggle than a simple difference of opinion, with one insider saying it wasn't only about Andrew's conduct, but about who actually steers the direction of the monarchy going forward. Royal author Andrew Loney has said William held the more decisive position, wanting his uncle dealt with cleanly rather than managed indefinitely, and having, in his own words, no sentimental attachment to Andrew at all. Charles, according to the same reporting, was more reluctant, more protective of family bonds even at reputational cost, a pattern that would repeat itself this time on a much larger and much more public stage. That limbo ended abruptly in the final weeks of October 2025. On October 17th, Andrew announced, through a palace statement, that he would give up his remaining titles and honors, including Duke of York, saying the continued accusations against him were distracting from the king's work. It was framed, carefully, as voluntary. 13 days later, on October 30th, Buckingham Palace went considerably further. In a formal statement issued on behalf of King Charles and Queen Camilla, the palace confirmed that Charles had initiated a process to strip Andrew of the style and title of prince altogether. He would now be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, a surname combining Windsor, chosen by King George V in 1917, with Mountbatten, his late father, Prince Philip's family name. The same statement confirmed his lease on Royal Lodge was being surrendered and that he would relocate to alternative private accommodation. Crucially, the palace made clear these were deliberate censures rather than a face-saving formality, stating explicitly that they applied notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him, and closing with a direct statement of sympathy for the victims and survivors of abuse. It is close to unprecedented in modern British history for a king to formally strip a living sibling of the title prince. Andrew was reportedly relocated to a property on the Sandringham estate, and reporting indicated he was unlikely to receive any of the roughly £488,000 he could otherwise have been owed for an early lease surrender, with the Crown Estate telling MPs the property was too dilapidated to justify a payout. At the time, this looked like the end of the story. The Crown exercising the maximum authority available to it, short of anything requiring an act of Parliament, to distance itself from a member who had become a liability. It was not the end of the story. It was, in retrospect, the opening act. In January 2026, the United States Department of Justice released a fresh, massive tranche of documents connected to its investigation into Epstein. Millions of pages of emails, flight logs, photographs, and internal records. Andrew featured prominently. The files included an email exchange in which he appeared to advocate for Epstein's rehabilitation even after Epstein's 2010 sex offender conviction, correspondence discussing a beautiful Russian woman he wanted Epstein to send him, and photographs appearing to show him in physically compromising positions with a young woman at one of Epstein's properties. Separately, and far more legally consequential, the documents appeared to show that Andrew had forwarded confidential UK trade reports to Epstein in 2010, at a time when Andrew was serving as Britain's special representative for trade and investment, a taxpayer-adjacent, government-linked public role he held from 2001 to 2011. That detail is what turned a reputational scandal into a criminal one. Sharing sensitive government trade documents with a registered sex offender while holding an official public role falls under a specific and serious offense in English law called misconduct in public office, a charge that, in its most serious form, carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. Thames Valley Police, which covers the area around Windsor, confirmed it was assessing the new evidence. Then, on February 19, 2026, Andrew's 66th birthday, they moved. He was arrested at his new residence on the Sandringham estate and held for roughly 11 hours while officers searched properties in both Norfolk and Berkshire, including his former home at Royal Lodge. He was released that evening without charge, under investigation, meaning the inquiry continues, but no formal charges have yet been filed. Assistant Chief Constable Oliver Wright said the force had opened a full investigation following a thorough assessment, and stressed the need to protect its integrity and objectivity given what he called the significant public interest in the case. King Charles responded within hours, in a statement notable for how carefully it separated the institution from his brother. "I have learned, with the deepest concern, the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office," the king said. "What now follows is the full, fair, and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course," he added, that it would not be right for him to comment further, and that he and his family would continue their duty and service. William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, issued a supporting statement of their own. It was, in effect, the king publicly and explicitly placing his own authority beneath that of the police and the courts. A striking moment for an institution that has, for most of its history, operated by its own internal rules, answerable mainly to itself. The symbolism of the arrest itself is hard to overstate. Multiple outlets confirmed Andrew is the first senior member of the British royal family arrested in nearly 400 years, a fact repeated across NPR, ABC News, PBS, and NBC's coverage, all pointing to the same conclusion. Whatever protective authority the Crown once had to shield its members from ordinary criminal process, that authority has now visibly and publicly failed to hold. Virginia Giuffre, who had accused Andrew of abuse and died by suicide in 2025, did not live to see this moment. Her siblings released a statement calling it a small but meaningful victory. At last, today, our broken hearts have been lifted at the news that no one is above the law, not even royalty, they said. He was never a prince. For survivors everywhere, Virginia did this for you. The investigation did not end with the arrest. In the months that followed, British media reported that Thames Valley Police had significantly widened the scope of their inquiry, moving beyond the original trade document allegation into a broader examination of potential sexual misconduct, corruption, and fraud spanning years. The Sunday Times reported that police were examining an alleged incident from 2002 at Royal Ascot, involving accusations of inappropriate conduct with a woman at the event, an occasion that was, notably, attended that year by Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles, Prince Edward, and Andrew's own daughter, Princess Beatrice. Detectives were also reported to be seeking to speak with a separate woman who claims she was taken to Andrew's Windsor residence in 2010 for what police described only as sexual purposes. Separately, a U.S. lawyer who has represented dozens of Epstein's victims publicly called for London's Metropolitan Police to reopen an earlier closed investigation into whether Andrew had used a Met Police Royal Protection Officer to gather damaging information on Virginia Giuffre, a claim the Met had previously declined to pursue for lack of additional evidence, but which resurfaced as pressure mounted. Buckingham Palace's position throughout this expanding investigation has remained deliberately narrow. A palace spokesperson told reporters that the institution does not answer questions about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor specifically because he is no longer a working royal, a formal, engineered distance that lets the Crown continue operating, continue its public engagements, continue projecting stability, while one of its own bloodline relatives sits under active criminal investigation just a few miles away. It is, functionally, the institution's version of due process. Strip the title, surrender the lease, issue a carefully worded statement, and then step back and let the ordinary machinery of British law run its course without further royal comment. But the pressure hasn't stayed confined to the police investigation. In June 2026, the National Audit Office, Parliament's independent public spending watchdog, published its own review of royal property arrangements carried out at the direct request of lawmakers on the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee after Andrew was stripped of his titles. The findings added a financial dimension to the scandal. Andrew, it turned out, had for more than 20 years been quietly earning undisclosed private income by subletting 3 of the 8 cottages on the Royal Lodge grounds, even while paying only a nominal peppercorn rent himself under the terms of a 75-year lease he'd signed in 2003. The report could not determine exactly how much money he'd made from the arrangement, an omission that Margaret Hodge, a Labour peer and former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, called shocking. Giving evidence to MPs, the Crown Estate's chief executive, Dan Labad, defended the original lease terms as representing best value at the time, given the millions spent on refurbishing the property. The same review also revealed that Andrew's daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, live in rent-controlled palace properties funded by their uncle, King Charles. Separately, further emails released as part of the ongoing document disclosures showed that Andrew's own taxpayer-funded Metropolitan Police Protection officers had, in 2010, been instructed to provide door security at a dinner party inside Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, a full year after Epstein's registration as a convicted sex offender. A former head of the Royal Protection Command called it hard to believe that officers stationed that close to Andrew for years never witnessed anything troubling, describing what he called a culture of silence around his conduct. Reporting has separately estimated that British taxpayers spent in the region of £100 million on security for Andrew, his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, and his daughters over the preceding 2 decades, before his dedicated protection and allowance were finally terminated by King Charles in 2024. Taken together, the misconduct investigation, the National Audit Office findings, and the security spending revelations have pushed this well beyond a story about one man's personal disgrace. It has become a genuine accountability question for Parliament itself. How a member of the royal family was able to draw undisclosed income and taxpayer-funded protection for years with so little independent scrutiny, and why it took a criminal investigation to finally force that scrutiny into the open. That's precisely why this story matters more than any single scandal on its own. It's genuinely testing something that has never been tested quite this publicly before. Where does the Crown's authority to discipline its own family actually end? And where does ordinary British law begin? For centuries, the answer was murky by design. Royals who embarrassed the institution were quietly sidelined, sent abroad, married off, or simply excluded from official engagements. Punishment handled entirely inside the family, entirely outside public courts. Andrew's case has blown that arrangement open. King Charles could strip a title. He could not, and did not try to, prevent a police investigation, an arrest, or a search of his own family's private estates. The most powerful ceremonial figure in the United Kingdom formally deferred, in his own words, to the appropriate authorities, an acknowledgement, whether intended as one or not, that the Crown's real authority in 2026 is symbolic and reputational, not legal or protective when it comes up against the machinery of a criminal investigation. There's a political dimension layered on top of this too. Andrew's case has not existed in isolation. The same Epstein document release that reignited the investigation into Andrew also implicated Peter Mandelson, a former Labour cabinet minister who had been serving as Britain's ambassador to the United States before being removed from that post over his own documented Epstein ties, and who has separately denied any criminal wrongdoing. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer was asked directly whether Andrew should testify before the US Congressional Committee investigating Epstein's network. And while Starmer stopped short of demanding it, he said, as a matter of principle, that Andrew should. Members of the US House Oversight Committee have separately accused Andrew of hiding from their own request that he sit for an interview, and victims' advocates have publicly pushed for him to appear regardless of his royal background. Even outside government, the reputational fallout has reached into everyday civic life. A Northern Irish town council voted to rename a street that had previously honored him, a small but telling sign of how thoroughly his public standing has collapsed. None of this pressure has direct legal force inside the UK. All of it adds to a growing sense that the old tools of royal damage control, a title stripped here, a statement issued there, are increasingly inadequate for a scandal with this much international, criminal, and political weight behind it. It's worth being precise, as always, about where confirmed fact ends and ongoing process begins. Andrew has not been charged with any crime. He denies, and has consistently denied, every allegation made against him, including the misconduct in public office suspicion, the Royal Ascot allegation, and the broader sexual misconduct, claims police are now examining. Being arrested and investigated is not the same as being convicted, and British law is built around exactly that distinction for good reason. What is confirmed, on the record, from police and palace statements themselves, is this. A senior member of the royal family was arrested for the first time in centuries. His own brother, the reigning king, publicly stated that the law must take its course rather than intervening. And the investigation into his conduct has only widened since that arrest, not narrowed. What happens next is genuinely uncertain, and that uncertainty is itself part of the story. If Andrew is eventually charged, Britain would be looking at a criminal trial involving a man who was, until recently, fourth in line thinking of royal proximity to the throne, tried under the same laws and the same courts as any other citizen. A scenario the monarchy has never had to navigate in the modern era. If the investigation concludes without charges, questions will likely remain about whether the stripped titles and quiet eviction were ever really about accountability, or simply about managing optics until public attention moved elsewhere. Either outcome puts real pressure on an institution whose entire authority rests on public trust rather than legal power, at a moment when trust is precisely what's being tested. What's clear, cutting through all of it, is that this is not a story that needs to be exaggerated or fictionalized to be dramatic. The actual documented facts: an unprecedented royal arrest, a king publicly deferring to police, an investigation widening month after month, a parliamentary watchdog uncovering decades of undisclosed income, and a family relationship reportedly strained for years over exactly how hard to come down on one of its own, already carry more weight than any invented headline could. The Crown's authority isn't being challenged by rumor here. It's being tested simultaneously by police, by Parliament, and by the press, in full public view, with real consequences that no palace statement can fully contain. That, ultimately, is the real story of Crown authority in 2026. Not a monarchy that rules above the law, but one now forced, in full public view, to prove it doesn't.